Hey everybody, welcome back to the Branch 458 podcast. My name is Ritchie. I'm the branch's financial secretary. Today we are going to be talking about the joint statement of violence. As you probably saw in the title of the episode, we decided to break this episode up and discuss it over several episodes instead of trying to do it all in one episode because we could probably go on and discuss it for 3 or 4 hours or possibly even more. So this is just one of many of the episodes about the joint statement. Just a little bit about the person that is on the episode with me. For those of you that don't know, there are four major steps to the grievance procedure. Usually grievances are initiated at the informal A step at the station level by your station steward. That's the first step of the grievance procedure. The second step is the formal A level. After that, if it's unable to be resolved, it is sent to step B, the third step of the grievance procedure. And then from there, if it's still unable to be resolved, it goes all the way to arbitration, the fourth step in the procedure. Each step of the way, there are advocates that are trained to handle grievances at each level. And we are fortunate enough to have this person that is trained in all four levels of the grievance procedure. He's a true advocate for our members. It's someone that I respect that has helped me out a lot. Whenever I need help, whenever I'm just in a bind, I don't know how to word something or I need to find something, I always call him. He's someone that is always able to answer my phone call and help me out. So if you have this guy's phone number, you have his Facebook. If you see him, just give him a thank you for everything that he does. He'll talk a little bit about the many hats that he wears, but one of those hats is our branch's vice president. So I'm recording this intro at a separate time, so I will start off the episode and allow him to introduce himself.
This is Eric Bew, Vice President for Branch 458. Some of you may know me as your steward. I serve as either the alternate steward or steward for over 20 of our offices throughout the branch. I've met most of you through that capacity. In addition to being the steward, I'm also one of the ones that helps assist President Mayfield with the training that we put on for our stewards. Outside of the branch, I'm also a Step B representative and an arbitration advocate. So I represent carriers at all levels of the grievance process.
Yeah, so you're kind of that's kind of why I asked you to come on to this podcast. We're going to talk about the joint statement of violence here in a minute. Um, but you're also a facilitator, right?
Yes, facilitator for the CCA Academy and certified on the job instructor at the Moore installation.
Awesome. Where'd you start out at?
As a CCA, I started out at Southeast Station in Oklahoma City.
That's where I started.
Correct.
And so you were a steward there, is where you started in the union?
3, 4 months after I made career, then President David Miller contacted me and asked if I would serve as steward, one of the two stewards at Southeast Station. Southeast Station is large enough that they get a chief steward and a steward. And one of our stewards at the time was getting ready to retire. And David said my name came up, someone who might make a good steward, and asked me to fill in. At the time, he said to give him 3 months, and that if I didn't enjoy it or like it after 3 months, I could always quit. Eight years later, I tell everyone I've done my 3 months, so at any point I can walk away.
That's kind of how David got me into doing this. So this is all David's
It's
fault.
all David's fault.
All right, so let's jump into the joint statement of violence. So I kind of gave it away a little bit. JSOV is what we kind of call it around here. If you hear JSOV, that's what we mean. It's joint statement of violence. So let's get into what is that? What is the joint statement of violence?
So, as you mentioned, JSOV is the acronym because we here in the Postal Service just love our acronyms. JSOV is short for Joint Statement on Violence and Behavior in the Workplace. That's the full title of the document that was signed by 9 different parties back in 1992.
Yeah. So it I don't know if we want to read it. I'll definitely put it in the description if anyone does want to read it. It should be posted somewhere in your facility. I know it's in the bulletin on the bulletin board at Westside. Um,
I wonder why.
yeah. But where did this document? It's in the first paragraph, but this document was signed after an incident.
An incident.
Let's talk about that a little bit.
Unfortunately, it took the incident that you're referring to for the parties to get together, more specifically the Postal Service, to get together and acknowledge that something needed to be done. Uh, as Casey said, we're not going to read the whole thing, but the first paragraph says, "We all grieve for the Royal Oak victims." In November of 1991, a carrier in Royal Oak, Michigan.
He went into the post office, and much like all of us here, we know in Edmond, Oklahoma, the same thing happened in the 80s. And it was kind of a rise nationwide of this happening in the workplace. And it's where the phrase going postal even came from. But he went in and shot and killed several of the coworkers, management, and uh, craft employees in the Royal Oak station.
Correct. It was, uh, you mentioned Edmond, Oklahoma, August of 86, which to date is the most deadliest workplace shooting to ever occurred in the United States. And then a little over 5 years later, we have the Royal Oak one, where same thing, he goes in and shoots the supervisor and then a few of his coworkers.
Which thankfully those acts have decreased, I would say. But there's still acts of violence and behavior in the workplace. And that's kind of what we're going to address a little bit. But it's pretty sad that uh, that big of an act had to happen for all the parties to come together and sign that document. We call that M 1242. It's the M document that's assigned to uh, that letter, that agreement. So right after that, Postal Service agreed to all of it, right? They changed their ways, and we're a new Postal Service now, right?
Wish. It was signed in February of 92, and it's almost as soon as they signed it, they did everything they could to get out of it. They didn't want to enforce it with their own management. They would try to use it against craft employees, which was the fear of one of the unions, craft unions at the time. It took over 4 years after the signing of the joint statement on violence and behavior in the workplace for a national arbitrator to tell the Postal Service, you signed it, you need to go by it.
Yeah, they basically said this is a contract. You you have a pledge. You all laid out what that pledge was. You laid out what the consequences, I guess, is a word, of violating that pledge, and you memorialized it by signing it. So it took a court ruling for them to say that this is a document and you have to abide by it.
Correct.
So this is in our national agreement now.
It is. Article 15 has the joint statement on violence, as well as the arbitrator's decision saying that this is something that management has to abide by, that it is a grievable document if management violates it.
Yeah. So there's a M 1243 is the second joint statement of violence and behavior in the workplace. It doesn't get talked about a whole lot, but let's talk about that one just a little bit. This one was the parties got together a few months after the signing of the first one, and it's basically them just saying that all of these topics and issues need to be addressed at the lowest level possible, that they're all reaffirming that they are committed to having a workplace free of violence. Anything else on that?
As you said, it doesn't get talked about as much as the first one, but it does. It even starts out with, we affirmed our belief in the first joint statement, and we have continued to meet regularly and engage in dialogue on the issues addressed in that statement. But as we stated, it's almost as soon as they signed this document, they tried everything they could to get out of it.
Yeah, which we won't get into all the court cases, but there are numerous court cases about them saying that this is not an agreement. That's just something that we signed on that day. I can't even imagine what their excuses were in those court cases. Um, but let's talk about what carriers would do on a day to day. So Eric and I talked before this podcast for a little bit. Probably the most difficult portion of our day is dealing with management in the morning as they're coming around with their numbers, telling us when we need to leave the office, when we need to come back, what our workload is going to be. So in the morning, when management's coming around and they give you your numbers or whatever, do you have any advice for carriers in the morning to get through that interaction?
I would agree with you that it is the hardest part of our day is dealing with management. More than dealing with customers, more than dealing with dogs, dealing with management is the hardest part of our job. And that interaction in the morning when everyone's together on the workroom floor is that key time. When management's coming around and giving you those numbers, do not argue. That would be my biggest thing. You're not going to win an argument with management. They're stubborn. They're going to give you those numbers and they're going to abide by those numbers because that's what the program says. If they start asking you questions, one of the first things you should do is ask them if those questions could lead to discipline. If those questions could lead to discipline, you need to respectfully tell them that you will only answer questions once your union representative is present and leave it at that. Going back to my first point, don't argue.
Mhm.
They're gonna give you those numbers. You just say okay and move on.
Well, it's not going to do any good arguing with them anyway.
No, never does. Even on the union representative side, it does no good for us to argue with them because they're set in their ways, their stubborn ways. If you disagree with the times they've given you, your leave time, your return time, that's when you verbally inform them you're not going to be able to do that and request a 3996, PS Form 3996. That's the form we use to let them know that we're not going to be able to finish in the time that they predict we will.
Yeah. Yeah, and I always try to tell people those 96s aren't for management. Those 96s are for us to protect us as carriers. It's our receipt that we told them that we needed help or overtime on that day. But it's up to management to tell you what to do with that mail. We don't get paid to make decisions. They do. Uh, they don't make good decisions, but
No.
that's another issue. So they're going around, they tell you your numbers, they tell you that you're going to have an 8 hour day, and you don't think you're going to have an 8 hour day. You tell them, I need a 96. They give you a 96, you turn it in, they deny it. And they say, carry all your route, be back in 8. So we get stuck in that catch 22 of do I carry all of my route or do I come back in 8? How do you handle those, or how would you suggest handling that?
So we always tell carriers follow the last instruction. Carry all your route and be back in 8. In that instance, the last instruction was be back in 8. It is, as you said, a catch 22 or conflicting instructions. If I've told management I can't do it in 8 hours and they tell me carry all your mail and be back in 8, then my question, calmly and respectfully, will be what would you like me to do with the mail that I can't finish in 8 hours?
Yeah,
If their response is carry all the mail, I've been instructed to carry all the mail.
yeah. And what I like to do is repeat back to them how I understand what they're telling me. So if they tell me carry all the mail, be back in 8 hours, and I truly believe I can't do that, I'm gonna say like what Eric's saying. Okay, well, what would you like me to do with the mail I can't finish in 8 hours? And they'll tell me carry all the mail. So then I'll repeat back. Okay, just I understand that you want me to carry all the mail. Yes, that's what I said. So okay, I will carry all of the mail. Thank you. So you've just been given that inherent right and authorization for overtime, is what we're going to argue anyway. That's our job as stewards. That's not your job as a carrier to argue about that.
Yep. As you said, we get paid to carry mail. They get paid to management gets paid to make bad decisions.
Yeah. Their right to
Their
mismanage.
right to mismanage. Article 3, management's right to mismanage. The stewards are the ones that should do the arguing for you.
Yeah.
You just follow management's instructions as safely as you possibly can.
Of course, this isn't the only time you're going to run into problems with management.
No.
Not always are you going to be in your case and you're going to have someone next to you to your left and right. You may be walking to the hot case. You may be getting in your vehicle. You may be coming out of the locker room. Whatever the case is, and management confronts you, and there is an altercation. Let's call it an altercation. How do you deal with that, or how would you deal with that as a carrier?
Well, as a carrier, well, as a steward, I would recommend to the carriers handle it as calmly and as respectfully as possible. You're not going to do yourself any good by flying off the handle, by allowing that member of management to provoke you. If they're asking you questions, I refer back to my earlier statement of I will respectfully answer your questions once you provide my union representative. If they're making accusations, don't argue, don't get into it. Just request to see your steward about the way you're being treated. We tell stewards all the time that there's a difference between what we know and what we can prove. If you have an altercation with management, request to see your steward, write a statement. Be as detailed as you possibly can with that statement. What they said, what you said, how that statement made you feel specifically, not just I was mad. It also helps if you note anyone around you that heard the altercation because we can then interview and or get statements from those individuals as well. And it turns into a from a you said, management said into management said versus all of these witnesses.
Versus they said.
They said,
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah, so it's just like in discipline, whenever they're disciplining carriers, and all they have is, their word against ours. That discipline's probably not going to hold up. But dealing with joint statement of violence grievances or where management just flew off the handle, the hardest thing is whenever it's one on one or this thing happened in private and it's your word against management's. So, very detailed, very good statements help us a lot in grievance handling. So, National a long time ago put out some examples of different statements, and one of them is a bad example and the other one is a good example. So just to read the bad example. So grievance statement number one, this is the bad example. I asked for a 3996 today, and Supervisor X got in my face and harassed and intimidated me again. He had threatened me like this for a long time. I'm sick of it. I shouldn't have to put up with treatment like this. Supervisor X always singles me out and treats me unfairly. He gets so angry that I feel threatened all the time. I can't take it anymore. I'm a nervous wreck. This has to stop, or I don't know what I'll do. So that's the bad statement, which it doesn't really sound that bad, just on face value. But let's compare it to the good statement. So grievance statement number two, this is the good statement. I asked Supervisor X for a 3996 today, 8/30/2013, at 9 a.m. while I was casing my route. When I asked him for the 3996, he became very angry and started raising his voice, screaming that I didn't need a 3996. He got up from his desk, which is about 30 feet from my case, and rushed towards me. His fists were clenched and his face was red. He stepped into my case and came within 3 inches of my face. He kept yelling that I did not need any help to complete my route and that I had enough undertime to take half an hour from another route. I thought he was going to physically attack me. This isn't the first time he has behaved this way.
So as you read, there was the good statement and the good example and then the bad example. The first one, the bad example, the question I as a steward would have asked the carrier is how? How did he threaten you? What did he say? How was he acting? In the good example, you heard, you don't need a 96, fists were clenched, yelling, got up in the face of the carrier, and the carrier even said, I felt like he was going to get
Yeah, he was going to physically attack me.
physically attack me. That would be a prime example of what we need, a detailed statement of exactly what happened and not just they threatened me. Well, what did they say? In this case, very detailed down to the time that he asked, that carrier asked for a 96. And as the steward, one of the things I would then look for is who else heard this? Because if that supervisor was being that vocal on the workroom floor, there's a very good chance multiple other carriers heard it.
Yeah, 30 feet away.
Yeah.
And something else, just putting my steward hat on, thinking about it, we can request the 96s for that day. So if this carrier was denied their 96 or their 96 got denied, he probably denied some other carriers that day too. So we can interview those carriers. But the most important thing is to write a good detailed statement and also not have a statement that's 14 pages long either, because that usually doesn't help us out.
I know everyone wants to put as much as they can in there, but if we're only talking about this incident on this day, we don't need to hear about everything that supervisor's done to you in the past that might have been settled via other grievances or other outlets. We're only discussing on this particular incident, we're only talking about what happened that morning or that day.
Yeah, so if you can, do go near a coworker. Make sure if you feel like the tensions are rising and you're outside at your vehicle, hey, I need to go inside real quick, and maybe they'll follow you in, and there's going to be more witnesses or whatever you got to do to make sure there's a witness there. Ask them to write a statement. Put in a 13 to speak to your steward. So that's the best way to handle whenever there's an altercation with a supervisor. Can you think of something else? Do we need to?
Unfortunately, and this is one of the hardest things when dealing with a joint statement on violence and behavior in the workplace grievance, short of that member of management actually physically interacting with you on that particular incident, we as the union are going to have to show a pattern. So we may not be able to get something done right on the first grievance. It might just be everyone, all parties agree to treat each other with dignity and respect. Maybe the supervisor goes through some new training. But if we can show that pattern of behavior over a course of time amongst various carriers, then that's when we can actually get a little bit more teeth in our grievance resolutions towards these supervisors. Not to go off on too much of a tangent, I settled a case in Arkansas just this last month where the station manager had been using racial slurs towards a carrier, but it was out on the route. He went out, followed the carrier out to his route, and confronted him out there in a customer's yard. Thankfully, we had a customer statement who had heard the interaction, called the cops. In that case, there was a lot more that supervisor had to do, or that station manager had to deal with in regards to the grievance resolution. It wasn't just a slap on the wrist with some training. There were other incidents as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. The joint statement of violence and behavior, there's two aspects there. There's the violence and there's the behavior. So, of course, it's gonna entail like supervisor punched me in the face or whatever the physical attacks of violence. But the part that Eric's talking about is the behavior. And that's something that's a lot harder for us. Not impossible, but harder. We have to show a pattern. We have to have statements. Statements are key in those grievances. They help us out a ton. Or stewards can do interviews, but statements are better. It's from your own words. It's in your words. It's in your handwriting. You can type it too. Make sure it's dated and it's signed, but in your words is always the best way to do it. So that's the joint statement of violence in a nutshell. I'm sure there's stuff that we missed or maybe didn't talk about, but that those are the big things. That's where it comes from. That's what the JSOV is. Let's get into. We had a few questions, or I guess not a question, a comment about political mail, delivering political mail, delivering ballots, things like that. Do you want to touch on any of that?
Well, this is 2024. We all know it's an election year. If you didn't know, you do now. And it's not just any election year, it's a presidential election year. So we're going to have the primaries here in June, runoffs in August, and then, of course, the general election come November. Every election cycle, we have some confusion on how to handle political mail. Let's talk about ballots. That's the big one. We all know the arguments that were made on a national level in 2020 concerning absentee ballots. We have to deliver those ballots, no matter if they have postage or not. You cannot leave a returned ballot an outgoing mail at a customer's mailbox just because it doesn't have postage. It needs to be picked up, it needs to be delivered. As for the political mail that gets delivered for the candidates sending out their flyers, if you cannot deliver that piece of mail for whatever reason, it needs to be notated. And each station should have a separate place for political mail. I can't speak for everyone. I can just tell you that at Moore, we have a hub with a political mail placard on it, and any political mail that's going back to the sender gets placed in that tub. It has to be separated and documented, not by us, the carriers. That's not our job. We just stick it into that separate area to be documented by another individual.
Did you want to talk about letter carrier political fund at all?
Yeah, earlier, Casey asked about what all I do for the branch. One of my other hats that I wear is I am the Letter Carrier Political Fund Coordinator, or again, another acronym, LCPF. It is illegal for any labor union to use dues for any political activities. So the NALC has set up the Letter Carrier Political Fund. This is the fund that they use to help pass the legislation in Washington, D.C. that we want to see passed. The most recent example was the postal reform that was overturned. That was one that they had been fighting ever since 2008. It took them that long to get it done. Currently, we have 6 or 7 pieces of legislation that we're trying to get passed. The big one is the Protect Our Letter Carriers Act. This is to help deter crimes and assaults against our letter carriers by securing keys, collection boxes. It directs the U.S. Attorney Office to prioritize cases involving assaults against letter carriers and strengthening sentencing guidelines for those found guilty of these crimes. Currently, the prosecution rate on crimes against letter carriers is less than 15%. One of the things that this bill does will help fund an attorney in each one of the federal districts
Yeah.
that will focus solely on crimes against letter carriers or postal employees in general. That is HR 7629. We also have the Social Security Fairness Act, which for those that are civil service employees, civil service retirees will eliminate the windfall elimination provision and the government pension offset. We have the Federal Retirement Fairness Act. This is one that for those of us that are former CCAs or even current CCAs, this act, HR 5995, would allow CCAs, non-career employees, to buy back that time, much in the same way that the military veterans can buy back their time. This would allow CCAs. I could go on and read every last one of these pieces of legislation that we're currently working on, but that's what the Letter Carrier Political Fund does, is it helps get this legislation passed for us in DC, Washington, DC.
Yeah, and it's very important. If you don't donate to the letter carrier political fund, think about it. It's something that comes out of your paycheck. You don't have to think about it at all. It could be as little as $5. You can go below that, but give me five. That used to be the old motto, I think, whenever it was what was it before letter carrier political fund?
Cold Step, I think,
Yeah.
is how they pronounce that acronym.
So their big thing was give me five. But it goes a long way. And if just think about it, if every letter carrier in our branch even just gave $5, how much of a contribution that would be to help fight for our rights to get legislation for letter carriers. And that the Protect Our Letter Carriers Act, I've talked about it a few times on here. That's going to allocate like $5 billion towards that. I think it's $1.4 billion a year, and it goes towards, like Eric talked about, prosecutors in each district. It goes towards the high security collection boxes, the arrow key program that they're working on jointly, not the one they're doing unilaterally, but a joint one. So it goes a long way, and it would mean a lot to donate to that to help us out.
A side note, as far as the letter carrier political fund goes, one of the biggest arguments I hear when I'm talking to members and trying to get them to sign up for this is that we only donate to certain members of a certain political party. That could be, yeah, that's not true at all. We donate to both sides of the aisle. We don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Independent. When it comes to the Letter Carrier Political Fund and the NALC, we support the legislators that support the legislation we want to see get passed.
All right. Well, in closing, if you guys have anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to hear about the joint statement of violence or writing statements or any of the House resolution bills that we talked about, any of that, you can write us at 458podcast@gmail.com. You can leave comments on the podcast on Podbean or Facebook. So just let us know what you guys want to talk about. We appreciate it. Thanks.
Bye.